All right, welcome everyone to the Coding with Callie meetup. Our guest speaker, Alex, is here. Alex, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and feel free to get started.
Sure, yeah. Is it okay if I share my screen right away too?
Yeah, the session is yours.
Okay.
Also, do you like questions while you're doing your presentation, or do you want people to?
Yeah, I'm like a huge fan of that. I don't know what y'all typically do, but I think that that's just like more natural. So I don't know if there's like a way on Zoom, like I think it has a hand raising, but honestly, if y'all just unmute and you like say, hey, excuse me, Alex, or whatever, just start blurting out noises. I'm happy to just take questions halfway through as well.
Okay, perfect. Yes, I typically will, regardless of what your desires are, just ask questions while you're talking. But everyone else is typically a lot more respectful.
Yeah, that sounds great. Like I said, either way is fine. I was kind of planning on having questions throughout and then questions at the end. So like whatever people are most comfortable with, totally open to all of
Perfect.
it.
Sounds good. Thanks so much.
But yeah, so today my name is Alex Lau, and today I want to talk about leveling up your skill set, which I feel like is kind of a wide topic potentially, and I have like a wide series of topics to cover. But I think like an underlying theme that I've noticed in software development is that like there's this phrase of like the only thing constant is change. I think that really applies to software as well. You kind of have to just be ready to be learning things all the time. So like a lot of the things that I plan on talking about are within the theme of getting better at learning, because I think that in itself is a skill of its own. So for me, I come from I like to call it a traditional background, but I feel like it's not that traditional anymore because like there's so many different diverse backgrounds for the better in the field of software development. But I have a bachelor's degree in computer science.
Ooh.
I got a job at a big company right out of school, and I worked there for a couple of years. And then about 12 years ago, I decided to move to Austin, Texas, among other reasons besides it just being warm and feeling like a cool city for somebody in his 20s. I also wanted to try working at different companies. In particular, I thought that startups seemed really interesting, and I was really interested in like learning Ruby on Rails at the time, and I thought that that was a really cool technology. So since then, I've worked at a handful of different startups and different companies in general of various sizes. And so if anybody wants to dig into that a little bit more and like the differences between those companies at all, I'm happy to kind of elaborate on that. In the last couple of years, I've really found like I've hit my groove within the domain of working in ed tech specifically. I really like working at ed tech companies I found, and I just the mission behind them really aligns with me. So I find that to be really exciting, kind of energizing to work at those companies. Finally, I've been doing full stack software development pretty much at all these companies. And I've also worked in some other kind of tangential areas as well, whether that be like more of a team lead role or even like a hybrid product manager slash engineer role for a while. So I feel like I've gained a lot of empathy from having those different kinds of roles, but ultimately I find myself always going back to just write a lot of code. And so the role I'm in right now and the roles I'm planning on working in for at least the near term are all still in an individual contributor capacity where I'm still writing a lot of code. I'm not sure if Callie brought this up or not, but I wrote this book recently. It actually comes out on Tuesday. It's called Keep Calm and Code On. It is about different mistakes that I've made throughout my career and how you can avoid them by using different strategies and mental models to think about different kinds of problems. I'm not really here to just talk about the book the whole time or anything like that. In fact, I gave a link to Callie that she's going to send out afterwards for if anybody wants to get the book at no cost to them. There's a link for doing so. You can just reach out to me directly over email or anything like that.
What is
Um,
how hard is it to write a book? This feels like a big project. Why did you do it?
yeah.
How long have you been working on this?
Yeah, there's a lot of different facets to it. For me, it was a pretty big project. I've been working on it for about 2 years. So like now
Wow.
that it's coming out next week, it feels like I often compare it to planning a wedding where it's like all this work that you put in ahead of time and like there's different parts of it that can be DIY if you want it to be, or you can just pay somebody to do it and it'll be faster and they'll have more expertise. but it'll cost you more, right? I think the same thing really applies to writing a book. For me personally, I never thought I would write one, but as soon as I like started, I wanted to write a blog originally, and so I was trying to just gather different topics and themes for it, and I kind of landed on this theme of talking about my mistakes, and I thought that that was something that I was very comfortable talking about, and that there was enough cohesion between all those different stories that would make for a good book. And so once I started doing that, I kind of decided that this might be the only book I ever write. So if I'm going to do it, I'm going to do it correctly as well. So I hired like an editor and a team to work with me. Even though I'm doing self-publishing, there's still a lot of players that I have on my team that are helping me do all these different things.
Amazing. Well, what an accomplishment. I'm very impressed.
Thank you. Thanks so much. I'm really excited to share it with people. And like I said, it's talking a lot about different mistakes that I made. And so the main reason I bring it up right here tonight is that the next couple of slides are directly taken from the book. And so hopefully if you like those, you'll enjoy the overall theme of the book itself. But yeah, like I mentioned before, since it's all about mistakes, like my whole goal with this is to share things that I wish I could have done differently, in hopes that that'll also kind of like make other developers comfortable talking about their mistakes as well, because I think that that's something that doesn't necessarily always get as much attention as it should, because I mean, I can't blame people for not wanting to always talk about how they've made a mistake in the past or admit they were wrong. But the reason that I think it's so important is because I honestly believe that those times are the times that are really good learning lessons and learning opportunities. And if you're able to kind of like reflect on those, you'll grow a lot more as well.
Sorry, Alex, I just want to interrupt.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the big mistakes that I did during my internship was I have a ticket and I talked to the scrum master. But the problem is I only talked to the scrum master about this ticket or task.
Okay.
And what I should have done was I should talk about this tickets on a scrum call with everybody, with the senior developer. And if they gave me if the senior developer gave me advice on how to implement it, it would take me so much less time. So
Sure.
yeah, that's my mistake.
Is it because of not talking to a senior developer that code wise it ended up being different, or was it like alignment wise? Did you like build the wrong thing, or did you build the thing incorrectly?
Well, I guess it's like I guess I kind of overcomplicated things. It could be a lot easier in terms of how you implement it. So I guess it's kind of design wise. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I've certainly done that same thing, and I think anybody who writes code long enough will certainly encounter like similar flavors of that same problem. So I definitely applaud you for sharing that, and it actually kind of aligns closely to one of the things I was planning on talking about later as well. Cool. Like I mentioned, these next couple slides are taken directly from the book. So in my book, each chapter is like a different pitfall, which is really just a mistake that I made, and again, how to kind of avoid it. So this first one is what I like to call the wheel reinvention pitfall. Sometimes maybe you'll hear this term of like build versus buy in software. And really what that's trying to point to is this idea of like, should you spend the time upfront on your own to try to come up with like a custom solution and write code yourself? Or should you just pay somebody else to do that for you? And I think it's a little bit more obvious when it's like a third-party product and you're having to actually put money on the table for things. But the world of code is kind of different, right? Because I think this emerges in a lot of other ways as well that are more subtle. So when I think of this pitfall, I think of one of the first interviews I was doing out of college, and I had like worked on this application on my own when I was in college. And one of the things I did was I wrote like a custom, like a bunch of custom logic for scraping websites. And I was in this interview and I was just bragging to this guy for like 10 minutes straight about how awesome I was because I had like written all this really complicated logic, and only I could have done it because it was like such a tough problem, you know? And the interviewer was, to his credit, very, very kind to me, because he was like basically trying to nudge me the entire time of just like, oh yeah, so did you look at any other solutions? Did you consider something else? Did you work with somebody else to like see how good of an idea this was. And I was just totally oblivious the entire time. I was just like, no, it was only me. Like I was the only person who could have done this. And so ironically, I did okay enough in the rest of that interview, but like all these years later, I still look back on that and I cringe at that answer that I gave, because I just can't help but think about how wrong I was. Like for the sheer academic experience of writing your own scraping logic, I think there's a lot of value in that, right? But I don't think that if you're working on a production grade application, that is ever like, in my particular example, like it's never a good, reasonable choice. So like the first thing I have over here is like, with this red X, I was trying to implement my own low level functionality, right? And if you look at the other side of the slide, it was also a problem that was already solved. So like there were already existing solutions out there for doing this exact same thing that I needed. And not only were they existing solutions, they were like existing libraries that I could have imported into my project a lot quicker than it would have taken me to write all that logic. And they were also a lot more robust because they were specialized. And so I have on the right side of the slide, it's a good litmus test to use the question of like, is this functionality specific to your application? Is it like a selling point of your application? If the answer is no, then it might be a good indicator that it's not a good time to write your own solution. So like an example of this would be, there's a million like authentication libraries out there, right? Where the entire purpose of the library is to help users sign into your application. Pretty much any app that you're building that's like a web app is just going to need users to be able to put in their username and password and handle like, you know, password recovery flow or something like that. If your sales team is like going out there and saying like, oh, our product is so awesome because we have this like really bespoke way of signing into the application, like that's not a good indicator of like what your application is actually doing. And so that's why I like to use that as kind of a litmus test, because I think that it's actually applicable to a lot of different ways that you approach problems. Does that all make sense for that example I just gave? I feel like I kind of like went through it really quickly. I see some nods.
Yeah, I think that was great. And I really like, and I want to highlight that you recognize the academic benefits to doing some of
for sure.
Because there's a lot of times that sometimes I do feel like people will jump to using a tool, but like not really understand how that tool is working. So I think, yeah, I like that you're pointing out like, oh, if you're selling your product and this is what you're building, you know, but like, it's still good to learn how your tools work.
Right. Yeah. I don't know if you've had John Cricket on for one of these, Callie, but he's like somebody on LinkedIn who has like a lot of, he'll give like examples of projects that are good to build where it's like re-implement your own XYZ. And I think that's a really good way. Yeah. It's like a really good way to learn about different concepts and fundamentals for things. Cool. The other pitfall I wanted to talk about is what I like to call the shiny objects pitfall. Basically, this is just the idea of like, there's a lot of different frameworks and libraries and languages that we can use as developers, right? And it's really easy to kind of get caught up in this idea that, oh, I've heard a friend of mine telling me how great Svelte is as a component library, right? So on my next project at work, I'm going to just like really try to use Svelte. And then I've heard like 10 other different technologies, and you know, I trust a developer that said they're really great, so I'm going to just try to incorporate as many of these as possible. I think that's dangerous for a couple of reasons. It kind of depends on the situation. I want to talk about both like personally and professionally how this has affected me. So I think personally, when I've fallen to like, when I've been susceptible to this pitfall in the past, I've been working on side projects where I've done exactly what I was just talking about, right? Where I've had friends tell me how, you know, framework X is cool and language Y is really cool. I've just tried to do all of them at the same time. And as you can imagine, that doesn't really go too well. I think I would have been better off in a lot of those instances if I had started off with a framework that I knew really well, and then added on like one or two new things as a way to pick up some new skills. Because I don't think it's bad to learn new languages and frameworks, but I do think you can quickly reach this point where you're just kind of overwhelmed with it. And I've certainly seen that with myself a bunch of times where when I'm picking all of these new things, it's really hard to make progress on a project because every single thing becomes like a roadblock in terms of having to like learn it over again. Whereas like for me, I know Ruby on Rails pretty well. So like if I pick that for writing my backend and then pick like a new like CSS framework or a new like component library to work on for the front end, I think those make for really good cases for learning something new in a side project because you know how to get like the fundamentals done on like the back end side of it, but you're also able to like expand your skill set by trying out some new things on the front end. Professionally, the thing that sticks out to me as like the biggest example of this is like I was on a team once where it was like a really small startup. There was maybe 4 or 5 of us in the entire company, and we were all Ruby on Rails developers. And one of the guys on our team had heard that Elixir was really cool, and this pattern called event sourcing was really cool. And to our credit, we did spend time researching it and looking into the pros and cons of it. But I think where we made the mistake was, even though we had heard like the cautionary signs of it, we had like some of that developer hubris where we thought, oh yeah, that was a problem for those other teams, but like we're not going to have those problems, right? We're all like super smart, and we really overlooked this quality of the team's background not being a good fit for that, because we didn't have anybody who had experience and like kind of gone through some of those hurdles before and like overcome those same challenges. So when we were trying to learn it, we were all trying to learn it together. And so I think in that example, like we would have been better off picking the technology that we knew really well, unless there was like a really good reason not to, and really kind of acknowledging what our existing skill set was. And so the long story short for that is that we did keep the other language that we picked, but we had also made some really terrible architectural decisions, and that we had to like back out a lot of that logic like a year later. So it was a lesson learned, and it could have been worse, but it also could have been a lot better. Does anybody have any questions about that one before I continue? Cool. In the ed tech world, we always use the phrase teacher pause for like school teachers giving enough time for questions. So I like to give that teacher pause. Those were the only 2 things I want to talk about that were specifically from my book. I have a couple more slides, and they're all kind of around this theme of if I could go back and just give myself advice for earlier on in my career. If I could go back and do things all over again, there's a couple things I would do differently. This first one is this idea of embracing beginner's mindset. I'm not sure if everybody is familiar with this term. Basically, the idea of beginner's mindset is trying to approach problems how a beginner would. And so what I mean by that is like, if I go and try to learn a brand new skill for me tomorrow, let's say it's riding a unicycle or something like that, something that I have no clue how to do at all. When I try to first do it, it's like a difficult task, right? So when I try to first do it, I'm not going to be really mad if I'm not able to, you know, ride it immediately and like go around turns and like do all these other things. As a beginner, I'm like much more lenient with myself, and I approach things with like a level of curiosity rather than just kind of assuming that I know how to do everything. And so I think in the world of code that it's kind of easy, at least for me personally, to get caught up in this idea of like, oh, I should just know how to do everything. Or like, you know, I have a bachelor's degree, like I should just know all these things. And the truth of it is, it's kind of like what I was talking about before. You're not expected to know everything, and you really can't know everything in a field as vast as computer science. And so really just this idea of being comfortable with failure and like just trying to get more experience for things. And so like a good example of this is kind of like what we were talking about for code review and like earlier on where we were saying like, oh, I'm much more likely today to acknowledge like, hey, here's a solution that I have in progress, but it's not like the final solution. And I'm not like putting it out into a pull request to say like, this is the way it has to be done. And if anybody has any feedback on it, Like, I'm not trying to defend my code at all costs, which is sadly something that I can't say I've always had as an attitude in my career. And so the way I try to think about it now instead is really, when you're putting code out for like code review, what you're really saying is like, rather than you being the person who has to defend everything, you're trying to ask your team like, hey, how can we get to the best solution? Because like the entire team that I'm working on is going to be supporting this code in the future. And like, we're on a team so that we can code together and come up with solutions together. And then finally, I feel like beginner's mindset really helps deal with imposter syndrome. I'm not sure if y'all are familiar with this concept. Seeing a couple nods. It's super prevalent in what's that?
I said we all feel like imposters.
Oh, I mean, I always feel like an imposter as well, right? I feel like it's something that's almost innate to the field for the vast majority of people. And although it's something that I still experience, I don't feel like I get as overwhelmed with it anymore. And I feel like I have ways of dealing with it. And one of the ways to deal with it and to kind of tackle it is by having this beginner's mindset. Because like I was saying before, like I feel like when I've been in this imposter mode before, I was really hard on myself and like always expecting myself to have known things or assuming that everybody else knows things. But if you're having this beginner's mindset, you're not only recognizing that you don't know everything and you're being open to learning about them, but oftentimes you're probably asking a lot of questions. And like, there's times when I ask questions and I'm like, you know, I don't want to do this, but I'm just going to, and then everybody else is going to know it and they're going to tell me the answer to it. But what really happens is like, I'll ask a question and then like, even the people who are like the most senior engineers on the team, they're like, oh, actually, I don't know this thing either. And I was like, oh, I just assumed everybody knew it, right? And it's hard to tell what everybody's like different levels of familiarity are in something that's like such a mental exercise as coding, right? And so literally that example that I gave of like me asking a question and having some other senior engineers not know it, that happened to me a couple hours ago even. So like I was, it was kind of an eye-opening answer even today where I'm like, oh, I need to kind of follow up on that and, you know, ask some more about this, see if it's a problem for other engineers in our company. And if it is, like, that's a really good opportunity to share that knowledge and have an impact on the larger engineering team as well.
Yeah, I like to kind of flip it because I feel like there's times where you're being mentored and you feel like the imposter, but then there's also times that you're someone else. And so when I'm feeling like the imposter, I try to remind myself of like how helpful it is when someone asks me a question and I have to like figure out how to explain a concept. It really reinforces it for me. And it helps me like think critically about like the decision I'm making with my code when like I am in the mentor position. So then I try to remind myself like, okay, I'm asking a million questions, but sometimes asking those questions is like helpful to the team because like you have a fresh set of eyes. You might be thinking about something a different way, or you might just be giving someone the opportunity to like practice explaining something, even as simple as that is helpful on a team.
Yeah, that's really. There's a couple of really good points in there. I think the idea of having to explain something really forces you to learn it a lot better. Like I see that a lot when I have people joining teams that I'm on where I thought I knew something and then it's like this person is being onboarded and they're asking how like XYZ subsystem works. And it's like, sometimes I can explain it really well. I'm like, oh yeah, you know, this code is kind of top of mind for me. I know it. It's not that big of a deal. But other times I'm like, oh, I thought I knew this code, but like really, I don't know it well enough to actually like explain it and articulate it. And so I also think that this idea of people onboarding and like having that fresh set of eyes that you're talking about, Callie, like that's a super valuable experience that I think teams don't always kind of like consciously acknowledge and take advantage of. Like when I'm on a new team, I try to, of course, ask a lot of questions, but also provide that perspective of like what things are painful for like getting set up in a dev environment, or like what things are just like kind of confusing to me, and like trying to separate out the times when it's like, oh, this is just confusing to me personally, or like I think this would be confusing to anybody, like maybe we should refactor it or document it or add some additional resources and support. And
that's a great way pointing out areas where documentation could be added, and then you yourself adding the documentation is a good way to get to learn, but also help the team out if you're feeling like you're not contributing, because you're like, someone one day is going to onboard this again, or someone's going to use this API, and you know, this is where my lack of knowledge can help.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And so I think it's nice because it helps build some confidence when you're first joining a team, where you can like point to this thing and say like, hey, I worked on this. There's like this physical artifact that I was like able to help on. And it also goes back to like this idea of being able to contribute and like expand your impact, right? Where it's like any developer that's onboarding in the future again, they could be helped by this thing that you're working on. So that's really cool. And it's like a cool thing to be able to point to and like talk about in things like annual reviews or things like that. The next thing I would do if I could go back to earlier on in my career would be to really kind of lean on my team. And so like I talked about the idea of how I used to think about code review and like the shift from just like me defending my code to building the best code possible as a team. But also I think one of the things that I've kind of grown to appreciate is really just doing like more paired programming and trying to learn a lot from seniors on the team. So I don't know if y'all have like done a lot of paired programming, or like my team right now even uses like mob programming, where it's like more than 2 people, which can be kind of chaotic, but also kind of fun sometimes too. But I think like any chance that you can get for paired programming is really beneficial. I mean, I could probably just talk for an hour about the benefits of that, but the biggest ones that come to mind for me are being able to see how somebody else thinks about a problem. Like if you're sitting down and trying to architect something, you can like go through the exercise on your own beforehand and then meet up with like a more senior person on your team and see how they would do it. That makes for a really effective way of kind of like getting some background and like thinking through a problem, and then giving you a lot more just context when you hear about how somebody else might try to approach a problem as well. There's also like this idea of having a really fast feedback loop when you're doing pair programming. So I'm not sure how often like the cadence is for people here for getting code reviews, but like on teams that I've been on, it's been anywhere from like really fast teams, they'll probably review your code within a few hours, right? Average, I would say, is maybe like a day, and then like slower teams, it's like longer than a day. And that can be a really long time to kind of like wait for something, and you're going to be in like a totally different headspace when you get that feedback later. Whereas if you're doing pair programming, you're having that conversation with that person instantly. And so like that feedback loop can be really fast.
Hey, Alex, what advice would you give to those who maybe haven't broken into tech yet and don't have the expertise? Because I totally agree. I think pair programming is the best, and I do it whenever I can.
Yeah.
I'm lucky enough to be at my work and have developers around. So how can people kind of get that same experience if they aren't working yet?
Yeah, I think it depends on the people you have like kind of in your network right now, or if you're like kind of looking to expand your network. So if you're in like a coding boot camp, for example, you're probably working really closely with other people. But I think there are tools out there that will like pair you with people and kind of like let you do like pairing online. I personally haven't used any, but I know that they exist. And so I can only imagine that doing that more often would help kind of like build your comfort level for things. But even if you're not in either of those existing scenarios that I described, you're probably in some kind of network with some other developer, right? And I think what you'll find in general is that people are really generous if you ask them for things. And so if you try to make it easy for them and you say like, hey, I'm working on this, you know, side project or something else, or like I noticed that you posted about this open source project that you were working on or something like that. If you reach out to them and you ask like, hey, would you want to, like, could I just shadow you on fixing a bug sometime? Or like, could we set some time aside where it's just like a quick half an hour and I don't even need to write any code or anything like that, but I just want to like kind of observe how you think about this and like ask questions. I think depending on your situation, you might have to be a little bit more creative and go out of your way, kind of like what I was just describing. But again, I think a lot of it just goes back to either leaning on your network or trying to expand it in a way that would be really helpful.
Do you think that there's still a benefit of like pair programming, even if like the person you're pair programming with is at a similar level to you versus like a senior?
Yeah, I almost think that that's the best time in some ways, depending on the problem, because I've like been in the situation before where like I was so early on and the person was so senior and they knew the problem so well that they kind of just like steamrolled the entire process and like typed everything up, and like I was kind of just along for the ride. And I think that there's like still some value in that, but I think it's kind of like playing a sport against somebody, right? Where like if I'm playing tennis against somebody and I'm just starting and they're like, you know, a semi-pro or something, like it's not going to be fun for them to be playing against me. But like if we're both like kind of starting at the same time, then we'll be a little bit more competitive and we'll be able to like kind of counterbalance each other's strengths, if that makes sense.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I always want to kind of figure out ways that can work for like people trying to break into tech and not just people.
Yeah.
For that.
Yeah, I guess like I definitely think that when it's two people at the same like similar skill level, that's really helpful. I would also say like it can be kind of intimidating sometimes, like if you're in that scenario that I was just describing of like, oh, this person that I'm pairing with is like really, really good. And like not everybody is necessarily super empathetic towards exactly where you are all the time, right? So like if you do it once and you don't like it because you didn't get matched with the right person, like don't be disheartened by that. Like I would still encourage you to try it with like a handful of other different people and just like see all these different styles of how people work, because that's really what it's going to be like when you're at work itself, right? You're going to encounter lots of different types of people and styles of work for things.
I love that. I love that it's true, because like I do feel like usually if you get into an awkward like interpersonal situation, you often walk away from it being like, wow, I suck. That was me. But it's a good point to consider that like teaching someone is a skill. So you could be the best coder in the world and you could know everything, but like you could be the reason, not you personally. I feel like, you know,
we can use me for the example.
And why a pair programming session doesn't work out. And it's not necessary. It's not the junior's fault if a senior doesn't know how to explain things or isn't patient, can't think of analogies and so forth.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I think like another thing to acknowledge with pair programming is that the person there's like the person who's doing the typing, which you call like the driver, and then the person who's like helping kind of dictate, who's the navigator. And I think like it's also important to kind of recognize those different roles and the different experience within that, because like even if I know a problem space very well and like the language and the framework that I'm using very well, if I'm the driver, it's like very mentally taxing to be typing all the keystrokes and like having somebody correct me on something and like having to go back and fix that and just like taking in all this input and trying to like write code on the spot. Whereas when you're the navigator, you get more opportunities to kind of be strategic and like think about things, and you're kind of like freed up from having to like worry about all the minutia of writing the code itself.
Yeah, and sometimes you can just throw out an idea and hope the other person knows how to do it. You know?
Yes, exactly.
Like you knew how to do it.
What, you don't like feeling like you're in a coding interview when you're pair programming? That's weird.
It actually, the more you do it, the more it does help with interviews as well. But yeah, it's like so many things, right? Where it's like not, at least to me, it's like not a natural skill. And I don't think I'm alone in that, right? Where it's like having to write code in front of other people is just kind of intimidating at times too.
It really helps to record yourself coding, because now I almost can't be quiet when I'm coding because I'm so used to recording myself doing it that I like sometimes I find myself talking and I'm not recording it. I'm like, you're being weird.
That's funny. If you just have like the rubber duck on your desk, right? Then you're just doing rubber duck debugging.
You're right. I'm not talking to myself. I'm fine.
This next lesson that I want to talk about is something that I really didn't learn until I had worked at a handful of different companies. And there's like one company in particular where I found myself like really lacking in work-life balance. And so I didn't realize it at the time, but I was working like 50 to 60 plus hour weeks for extended periods of time. And I didn't know until after I like left that job, just like how burnt out I was getting. And it wasn't until that I had that chance to kind of like reflect and have some time off, and then also like start at a different job and approach the work differently, that I realized how like lackluster my actual code that I was outputting was at that time. And so I think like it's really easy to get caught up in this mentality of just like being super hardcore about your work, and especially sometimes in my case at startups where it's like you're a small tightly knit team and like you kind of want to be part of the culture of the team. And so like if everybody else is working like super hard, you don't want to be like, oh, I'm the one person who's not working super hard, right? But ironically, there was like one guy on my team who was kind of like that, and I remember being like not annoyed with him because he's a great guy, but I remember being like, oh man, I wish I could do that, but I can't. Like I won't let myself do that. And the ironic part,
could, because I struggle with this myself, so I'm like invested.
sorry, what was the question?
How do you get to the point where you can? Because I'm on a team with people who work forever, and I'm like, wait, I want to close my computer, but everybody else is still
working. I think like part of it is just like drawing hard lines on things, and that's a lot easier said than done. I was talking about my coworker who like was really good at sticking to this, and I think for him it wasn't like immediately obvious that it was better for him to kind of like maintain the schedule. But if you looked at how our team performed over like the course of 6 months to like a year and further out, like he consistently delivered the best code and the best results. And it wasn't because he was putting in the most hours, it was because he was like better about having that work-life balance. And so I think it was really just like seeing his example. And like when I started my next job after that, I just kind of like didn't even give the opportunity to, I don't want to say myself or the company, like the way that I approached work was just fundamentally different. And so like it starts with you and like having those strict boundaries, but I don't know, is there like more to it than that, Callie? Like are there like frequently conflicts that break out at work or anything like that?
No. It's, you know what it is? It's just like I start at 7 and people start later. But then when like my time comes around where I'm like, all right, it's time to go, I like look at my computer and everyone is like, I'm about to take this ticket, and then they work for another few hours, but like they're all an hour behind too. So it's really like 3 hours difference. So sometimes I'm like, oh,
Yeah, that's like a tough situation to be in, right? I would almost recommend like trying to have like a hard stop that maybe is something that's softer at first, where you're like signed up for some sports team, right? Where it's like, this is this obligation that I have after work. If I can't make it for whatever reason for 1 week because work is like really intense, that's not the end of the world. But by default, I'm going to try to stop at this time because I have this thing coming up.
So I have a question, because like I'm like brand new, so have not like a job yet. Have you seen a difference, like you were saying, in the different types of companies, like startups versus like big companies, as far as like getting pushback for like if you leave on time versus when you're expected to stay later?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I haven't seen that in terms of the size of the company or the type of the company. It is something that I personally look for as well when I'm like looking for new jobs. But admittedly, like many parts of the interview process, it's like kind of hard to tell until you're actually like there and working, right? There's like different questions you can ask to try to like inform those answers. Like, so for me, my wife and I, we have a 1.5-year-old daughter, right? And so like one thing I'll ask is just like, are there other people with kids at this company, and like how do they approach like work-life balance or things like that? It's, in some ways I almost feel like it's easier to filter for red flags than it is to try to like be absolutely certain that a company is going to be really open to being good about those kinds of policies. Like I think if you're like, my approach towards Glassdoor is that it's kind of the same thing, where it's like you can't use it to tell if a company is definitely good, but you can use it to tell if a company is probably pretty bad, because like if you see overwhelmingly bad things about it, it's unlikely that it's just like a one-off instance. But yeah, I guess I'm trying to think of if there's any other like interesting, good kind of probing questions that kind of point towards work-life. I mean, you can ask directly like how does your team approach work-life balance, or like how do people handle things like, you know, obligations that come up, where it's like, how do people handle doctor's appointments, for example, or how do people handle when they have to take their kid into daycare or their pet to the vet or anything like that. And I've seen like different things that have worked better or worse at other companies too. Like I worked for one company where they had a day specifically. It was like every Wednesday or something like that. They had a policy where it's like, try not to have meetings on Wednesday unless it's really, really like critical. And the intention behind that was so that if you did have a doctor's appointment or something like that, you could just default it to be on Wednesday when you're planning things, because you know that there's not going to be a meeting that crops up or anything like that.
I just have a question.
Yeah.
So we work at your startup. How does your CEO apply for patent for their ideas, and how do they social and connect with the investors?
So the first question is if they had a patent for their ideas.
Yeah.
None of the startups that I've ever worked at have had a patent. They've all been like more in like the purely like software space rather than like having like a physical item. And then, oh man, working with investors. I mean, it's something that I've only seen like from the outside. Like I haven't ever been like in on like an investor call or anything like that. So keep in mind that my perspective is certainly different than somebody who is like, you know, the CTO even at a small company or something like that. But I think that a lot of the time you kind of get a sense of like how well connected somebody is, just like based on different things like the perceived frequency or perceived closeness they have with different investors. If it's just like you only get one call every few weeks that you're trying to like put all your eggs into that one basket and they don't even like really know the person, that can be you know, can be harder for somebody to like ultimately land an investment, or if they do, maybe they'll be put in a tougher position.
Okay, one more question.
Yeah.
Do you guys run your ads on like social media platform like TikTok to advertise your app or what?
Yeah, like the company that I work at right now is called Brilliant. It's kind of like Duolingo, but for math and science. So
yeah, I know.
I like to joke, like if you've ever watched even one like math video on YouTube, we've probably advertised to you. So yes, we do that a lot. I personally don't work on the team that handles that. And now that I've mentioned that I work for them, and since this call is being recorded, I should also mention that these opinions that I'm expressing are all my own. Brilliant. I like to joke that I'm not representing them and their engineering department today, but maybe they'll ask me to in the future.
I have to say your company's marketing team is very good. Your ads all over the influencer list.
Yeah, that's been a strategy that they've like really leaned into, and it's cool because like I'll watch a YouTube video that is somebody that I've just heard of prior to working here, and then it's like, oh yeah, they're going to talk about this product that we have, which is kind of cool.
Cool. Thank you.
Wait, so Jay, are we talking to investors?
Clarify a little bit more.
Yeah, like are you at the stage where you're talking to investors? I'm very excited for you.
Not yet, but we have a feeling that it's our project is gonna be big.
Oh my gosh, I'm so
and there's the reason why I asked if Alex CEO applied for a pattern is because it's the process of making a startup is a little bit counterintuitive against your advice, Callie. It's against building it in public. As a matter of fact, if you want to build a startup, you want to build in secret. You want to build everything in secret, and then once your product is done and you want to apply a pattern for your ideas so that other company doesn't steal it. So yeah. I learned that from my UX designer. She's absolutely amazing. I learned so much from her.
Yeah, and definitely not a business expert. I would take no business advice from me.
Yeah, that's been me.
I think this is the last slide that I had about things that I would do differently if I could go back. The last thing is just to like really be proactive about trying to learn and improve communication skills. For a long time, I was just, my attitude towards like software development is just, I'm here to write code and that's kind of it, right? But the longer I've been doing it, the more that I realize just how important that communication piece is. And so like an example of this would be a lot of the time I will, now when I pick up a ticket and I start working on a feature at work, I'll just take half an hour to meet with the stakeholder or the person who is talking or like who requested this ticket or this new feature in the first place. And I'll like try to make sure that I really understand what they're asking for. And this kind of goes back to what you were talking about before, Jade, of like if you could have met with a senior, you could have saved a lot of time on the thing you were working on, right? I think it goes back to this idea of you want feedback loops to be really quick. And especially in software, like the cost to the software development lifecycle is really expensive. Even if you're running like CI/CD and getting features out really quickly, like you still have to write the code, you still have to test it locally, you still have to open a PR for code review, you still have to get it QA'd, you still have to deploy it and get it out in production and verify it, right? That's a lot of pieces and a lot of steps to be going through, especially if you're realizing that you built the wrong thing at the end of that cycle. You have to go back and do it all over again. So like anytime that you can avoid having to go through that cycle with the wrong thing and just build the right thing the first time, it saves you so much time. And I think that this is one that I didn't really appreciate until I'd like gone through it a handful of times and like built the wrong thing like 3 or 4 times where I was just like so stubbornly trying to like get by with the minimal amount of communication over Slack with somebody versus if I had just taken the time to set up a video chat with them or get some face-to-face interaction if you're working in an office that's in person, like that would have made a huge difference and I could have like, avoided a lot of the missteps that I had made.
So I just want to kind of like piggyback off that real quick.
Yeah.
So my background is medicine. I've been a nurse practitioner for 12 years and I've been trying to get out of medicine. But the last facility I was at, they went from paper charting, which like who knew that was even a thing in this day and age, to like being a test site for a new software EMR. And so it wasn't bad, but I actually had the opportunity to talk with like the tech team. And like, you know, there were like bugs and glitches and things that we would send in all the time from our side. And he's like, he told me, he's like, just so you know, we're never going to get to those. We have like 15,000 requests that we are trying to get through. He's like, and for us to sit there and vet whether this is actually like even a cost-effective feature for us to add into the program, just because like you think it's useful on your side as a practitioner, like whether we can make that feasible or not. And just kind of what you said, like that actually kind of, that's something I've always still been interested in is maybe using the software development to go back and work with the EMR systems and take like the knowledge that I have, you know, of like why people are making the request, like for a specific feature. Cause like, if you can't tie it together, then like you said, you may just end up down this rabbit hole that's like, nope, that's not what we wanted at all. And now it's even worse. So thanks for that.
Yeah, if you're going through interviews, like I would definitely emphasize like your familiarity in that domain because that's such a huge part of like being able to understand that that's going to set you apart from any other developer who doesn't have that same experience.
Yeah. That's good. That's good for me to remember because sometimes I just want to like make the break from medicine altogether, but to actually like use the knowledge that I do have in a different area.
Actually, I want to ask this question for a long time, Sarah. You probably got the best job ever. Why would you want his career switch? if time go back to 1930, you would still keep your job. Well, why would you want a career change?
I know. It's kind of like the $1 million question. We could probably do a whole video on that. The short answer is like, I really went into medicine like with this altruistic, like, I want to help people, I want to make a difference, like I really think I can help people out. And medicine in the US is just very rarely about that. From an emergency standpoint, like you've just got administration that's like, see people faster, get them in, get them out, get them whatever they want and make them happy. And a lot of your job, like performances and like some of your salary is based on whether patients are 100% satisfied with the care you gave them. If they're 90% satisfied, they might as well be 0% satisfied. So it's this whole shift of just keeping people happy, but not practicing good medicine. And so I never found job satisfaction. It was never something I wanted to like help people, but incorporate good medicine. And I didn't feel like I could do either of those. I couldn't practice best medicine because that wasn't the actual expectation from the hospital. So it wasn't a good fit for me. My husband's still in medicine. And so then once we had kids, both of us trying to work 12-hour shifts, like we were just coming and going. We never saw the kids. It wasn't a good fit. And so I just wanted something different for me. But some people still like medicine, but for me, it wasn't the fit that I thought it was going to be.
Thanks for your response.
Yeah, wow, that was eye-opening in so many ways. Like I had like kind of like glimpse into some of those things that you talked about, but I had no idea that that's like it was so systematized and just a lot different than
very dog eat dog. So, and I live in an area where there's like a lot of nurse practitioner, physician assistant schools. So it's really hard to get a job, and the jobs are actually pretty low paying. A lot of nurses make more than nurse practitioners where we live because of the discrepancy in availability. So, yeah.
I have one friend who's a doctor, and she tells everyone, don't become a doctor. Like she was like, I'm too far into it. So like, this is my life, but like, don't do it.
That's my husband. Like, he's like, what else would I do? And I'm like, you're an amazing travel agent. You should do that. And he's like, I can't go back now. Like, I'm already committed. Like, I'm a doctor. I can't be a travel agent.
I was going to mention that your story reminded me of a shift in the way that I've thought about problems, particularly at startups before. I remember I was having this conversation with my CTO one time about like when you were talking about how there's 15,000 problems and like there are literally some that you're never going to get around to, like the idea that there would just be problems that we wouldn't fix or like good features that we wouldn't do really irked me kind of like earlier on in my career. I was like, why, if you know of a good idea, like why wouldn't you do it? But the truth of the matter is, like, especially when you're a startup and you only have like so much runway, that might be weeks or that might be months, you're not trying to just do like any good problem that comes along. You're trying to do the things that are most impactful to get you to like the next stage of being a company, right? So like, sure, you could make a button shinier or like optimize some flow that already kind of works pretty well. But just because you're making it better doesn't mean you're doing like the right thing and adding the most value for your customers. And that was, it was something that took me a long time to kind of like truly appreciate and to be okay with, to the point where it wouldn't like just kind of be irking at me, like I was saying.
Yeah, to like let it go.
Yeah, exactly. It's like almost, it's almost like the whole if you love it, let it go kind of thing, where it's like if you love the product that you're working on, realize that you want to work on the things that are actually truly beneficial to the end users of the product. That's a lot longer of a saying though, and not quite as catchy. Finally, I was going to mention that for me personally, I was never into public speaking, like at all. I like would get so nervous and like have done a lot of speaking occasions where like it did not go well at all. And the short version of the story is that I had a friend ask me to officiate his wedding like 7 years ago or something at this point. And when he asked me, I was too nervous to even answer. But finally, I was like, oh, this is a huge honor to be part of this and to even be asked to do it. So I made a pact to myself to go to Toastmasters, which is basically like public speaking club, and started going there regularly. Eventually officiated his wedding, and that went even better than I could have hoped for. But the thing that surprised me was that I kept going to Toastmasters, even though my initial goal was just to do the wedding and kind of stop afterwards. And a big part of that was because I found that I was being really successful at work, and a large part due to this. Like, I had gotten promoted to be like a team lead, and then a very brief stint as a manager, all within like, I don't know, a year and a half, 2 years at this company. And I know for a fact that a lot of it was because I was able to articulate ideas better and work better with the stakeholders at my company and other teammates, just because in general, I was able to communicate better. And so my point here isn't that everybody should go sign up for Toastmasters, but rather that just communication itself is a really important skill, and something that for many people is something that needs to be practiced and developed. And so there's other ways of practicing public speaking. You might have like a class at community college or the program that you're in, or even doing like stand-up comedy at an open mic night, or doing like improv or something like that. Those are all ways to kind of like practice public speaking and communication in general. Do we have a hard stop in 2 minutes, Callie, or is it kind of just whenever we're good?
My kid's in bed. We can party.
Cool. This is like the last official slide I have with content on it. Another topic that we could probably talk about for like an entire hour, or that could be its own talk, is interviewing. And for me, I just want to share like a handful of really helpful pieces of advice that have helped me personally. The first one is kind of what we were just talking about, Sarah, where it's like understanding the role at a company and where you can add value. And so like this example that we're talking about of like, you have a lot of domain knowledge and a particular skill set. If teams are like operating in that space, like, again, I would really try to emphasize that. But I think even for places where you might not have like direct experience in the realm that they're working in, just making an effort to go to their website, read about the company itself, their mission statement, their values, and trying to reference that both in the interview or like in a cover letter is a really good way to stand out. Because what most people do is just like go and see that there's a job open and then like do the application and not like do that much research about the company. And I think that like that's a big mistake, and that the candidates that I've seen do that in interviews, and like the times that I've done that as a candidate, like it's really obvious to like the interviewers who are the people that have like gone in and really paid attention to those kinds of things. The second one is kind of what we were talking about before, Callie, where you were saying that you can't help but speak when you're coding now. I think in a lot of interviews, like for better or for worse, doing live coding is like the reality of a lot of interviews. And again, this isn't something that comes naturally to me, and I don't think it comes naturally to a lot of people. But just the idea of getting comfortable practicing coding in front of somebody else is really helpful, because again, it's like anything else where it's a muscle. The more you do it, the more comfortable you get with it. And the good news is for this, like, you don't actually, like, the person that you're practicing in front of, it doesn't actually have to be somebody who's like in tech. Like my wife, she works as a designer, and like I've like had her just sit and listen to me like explain a problem and like go through the thought process and like type the code up. And yes, it is kind of awkward in its own way, but it's really helpful when it comes to being able to like get better prepared for an interview. And I think, Callie, you were saying before, what was that?
I was wondering what kind of designer is she, like in applications?
Yeah, she does like UX design, and she also works in ed tech.
You guys ever work together?
We have not professionally, but we've worked on side project stuff together, and
that's adorable. I love
it's gone pretty well. Yeah, I mean, it's funny because like we'll always talk about different things at work that are like dynamics that our team has, and she'll be like, "My developer said XYZ. Like, is that true, or is it really not that hard or whatever?" And I'll be like, "Well, maybe it is." Actually, there's like sometimes that like doing these things can be really difficult if there's like extreme tech debt or something like that. But yeah, it's nice to get that perspective.
Oh, that's fun. I like that. I'm excited to see the app you guys build one day together.
Yeah, I'll send it over. what was the other thing I was going to say with this? Oh yeah, Callie, you were saying that you've even done like video recordings of yourself. Is that right?
Yeah,
like,
I recorded myself building a whole MVP. If anyone's interested, it's the Build and Bubble workshop. But yeah, I just feel like it's really helpful to test yourself, because if you have to talk about it, again, you have to know how to explain it. So like, I find if I'm talking about my code and I'm stumbling over my words, then like that's a sign to me to go back and study, and that like I don't understand what I'm doing. So typically, yeah, like I'll code, and if I'll talk out loud, and if I go, how would I phrase what I'm doing here, and I don't know how to do it, then I go look it up and study more.
Right. Yeah, I think that that's like such good advice, because again, it's even lower barrier to entry, right? You don't even need somebody else to be able to practice it. Like all you need is like to have the screen recording. And but I mean, if you think about it in an interview, if you're not saying anything, it's so much more awkward, right? And like, you're really just like, if I'm interviewing somebody and they're not saying like anything at all, and then they spit out like some code that's at the end of this process, where like I don't really know what their thought process was, what they like, why they made certain decisions, like if something that they did was intentional or if it's just like a bug. Like it's so much harder to kind of like empathize with what they're thinking. And I think the point of a lot of those live coding exercises actually isn't to get the right answer, it's to show that you know how to think through problems. So like, even if your code isn't perfect, like the idea of being able to communicate with somebody and show what you're thinking is really valuable.
So like, I haven't obviously got to like the interview stage of anything yet, like not even looking, but when you guys are talking about like doing the live coding during an interview, is it the expectation that you're like talking through your code as you're writing it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's not just writing it and coming up with the solution. Like probably more of the goal is to actually like see what your thought process is.
Sometimes I don't even get to code, Sarah, because I'm like, I talk so much. It's like, yeah, so like you'll read the problem, you'll come up with like a game plan, you'll kind of like,
Okay.
I mean, I'm saying you as if like, this is what you should do. This is just what I do. I'll like, throw my game plan out and ask my interviewer like what they think. Like, do they think that's a good game plan? How would they approach it? And then yeah, then I'll like work through an example without doing any code, and then maybe I'll start coding. But yeah, I don't think I've ever finished a coding interview, because usually we chat most of the time.
Okay, that's really good to know. I just had it in my head that you're just supposed to like sit down and like, type out this code and then be like, okay, here it is, and then be done with it. So that's obviously like the opposite of what you should do. So
I mean, I've definitely seen it structured at different places. Like some companies will interview with the intention of like never having like a complete problem, but like trying to work through X number of steps, like trying to get past, like you're given like an open-ended problem and you start with like step one. And then like, once you've done that, they'll add like some new requirements onto the problem. And then that's step two. And so you're trying to like, just get through those. And like, every company is different, obviously, for how they are like grading things. But I guess to kind of like build on to Callie's answer, like one thing that I really like doing is talking through my approach and then like outlining it in plain English and using like pseudocode, where it's like, the things I want to do are fetch this request from the API, make the request to the API. Then I want to like, massage the data in some way. And then I want to like write it to a CSV file or something like that. And I'll like say those are like the high level steps, and I'm explaining it in plain English. And then that makes it a lot easier to like have that written out as just like a code comment and go through and like actually implement those things too. Because like for me, trying to like explain it as I'm writing it, like literally as I'm writing every single statement, is really hard. But like coming up with a game plan and talking through that is like the right balance for me of just like, this is generally what I want to do, and then I want to like go and execute it. And like writing the code, I try to do faster but accurately at the same time, which is again always tough during an interview.
I feel like not everyone knows the same languages. And I think like for me, it's like, to be able to demonstrate that you understand programmatically how you would do something, and it's not actually that important what the syntax of, or like what language you would be doing it in, is something like I would look for. And like, I feel like it's helpful too, like even pair programming, like once you get on the job, like you might not know the language that you got hired for at first, but like you can still add to the team because like, how computers work, type of a thing.
Right.
And you
Okay.
because isn't that what you're doing right now with your degree? I feel like all your posts are like very impressive on things.
Well, that was like, I actually recorded the video I did earlier and I kept stumbling over my words. So I went back and I was like, I don't think I understand this. So I had to stop and like look at it all over again.
Nice.
Well, the very last thing I want to talk about, I feel like is kind of a nice note to end on, at least for my portion of this, but like just this idea of leveraging your network and really leaning into warm introductions for companies. Like the thing that I do now when I'm looking for a new place to work is like, I'll go and look up that company on LinkedIn and I'll see if there's like anybody else that I know that's a mutual connection that works there. Because even if I'm like not dead set on applying for a job there or like a specific role, like it's always nice to be able to like ask them about their experience or like ask if they could make an intro. Because a lot of the times, if you're able to get a warm intro at a company, that will at least put your resume at the top of the stack and get you to have like a phone screen with somebody. Now, it's not always the case, again, because every company is so different. But if you're even able to do that at places, that alone is huge, because that's like getting to that top of the funnel and getting past that first step. Like that's when they eliminate all the other, like the vast majority of their candidates, just by the way that recruiting works, right? So like if you're able to like get somebody to look at your resume and have a phone call with them, that alone is just like so huge. Because otherwise you're kind of trying, like if you're doing cold applications, not that you shouldn't at all. I think like ideally you probably want some kind of hybrid approach, but like if you're just doing cold applications, you're really like trying to win like what I like to call like the resume lottery, which is, it's just really tough. Like you have to kind of know exactly what companies are looking for, and they all have their own ways of trying to do that. So again, just like reaching out, trying to meet people. Like when I first moved to Austin, I went to a lot of different tech meetups in person. And I like got a handful of the jobs that I had worked at from people, like from the connections that I had made there, and like meeting those people and like ultimately getting to have a seat at the table for interviews because I met those people. So cool. Yeah, I don't know if you have anything else that you would add onto that, Callie. Like anybody that's here, if you want to add me on LinkedIn and like message me and ask me about job stuff, I'm like super happy to talk about them.
Also, Alex, I didn't ask you before, but do you want me to share the link with the people that are just in this call in the Zoom chat right now, or do you want that shared with the whole Slack community? I don't want to like give your book away for free too much. You deserve some money.
Oh, you can share it in the Slack. Is it like 100,000 people in there or what?
Yeah, I mean, like I think like 150, and I don't know how many people are active, but I just want to.
Oh yeah, no, that's totally fine. I mean, yes, I would love to sell as many copies of this book as possible, but honestly, the reason I wrote it is to help out their developers out, and I especially want to help out developers that are like breaking into tech and earlier on in their career. So if I can do that, and cost is like any sort of issue whatsoever, I want to like alleviate that and have that not be an issue.
I love that. All right. Well, I shared it in the Zoom chat. I'll put it in the Slack too, but maybe send me a non-free one and I can put that. That's
sure. Yeah.
Cool. Do we want to do, I should go, but if anybody has a pressing question, I'll open the floor for one question. Anybody?
I think I just want to say thanks, Alex. That was really good.
Well, thank you so much.
And thank you, Toastmasters, for giving Alex the skills necessary to bring us this great content right now.
Yeah, it was really honestly a game changer for me. Like I never thought, if you'd asked me, I don't know, 10 years ago prior to taking Toastmasters, like if I would ever be voluntarily speaking to groups of people, I would have been like, heck no, that's not for me. That's just for like, you know, business majors or something. Like I'm a developer, so I don't have to talk to people. That was like the mentality that I had. But again, like so many other things where it's like the longer I've worked in tech, the more I've realized a lot of it is just like communication and interacting with people and building great relationships with your coworkers.
All right. Well, I shared your LinkedIn. Thank you so much. This has been great. Is there anything you want to plug other than your awesome book, which everyone, including the 5 people who watch this later, should go buy?
No, I don't think so. I didn't realize that we had a chat going and there were so many messages in there. So I'm really sorry if there was anything that I missed or people were asking questions in there. But no, I think just like I said, feel free to add me on LinkedIn. I'm super open to chatting with people and trying to help out however I can.
Yay.
Thanks for the marketing tips, Alex. It was very helpful.
Yeah, I'm glad. Thanks for asking questions. I feel like that makes doing these kinds of presentations a lot more interactive as well, and that you get better information for asking, like better information from the speaker if you're asking them. So definitely encourage you all to continue that in the future.
Thanks.
For sure. All right, guys, we will close it out here. Shameless plug from me. If you haven't signed up for one of the cohorts, Dan only has one person so far in Deploy Public, so let's get him some more. But otherwise, no worries. We'll see you next week for our next meetup. Thanks again, Alex.
Thank you. Have a good night, y'all.